The Visions of the Black Experience, this is our actual third year, but there is a history that goes beyond these 3 years. There was a project called Project Black Cinema in the late 80s, early 90s in Sarasota, which was the first film festival that focused on African American films, films of the African diaspora, and local African American filmmakers. And actually, it was a fairly successful cinema film festival. In fact, some of the original people that came to that film festival were people like Angela Bassett. For whatever reason, that film festival ended, and so there was a gap for many years between that festival and what we have now called the Visions of the Black Experience Festival. So we want to carry on that same tradition that they had with Project Black Cinema. We want to showcase African American films. We want to talk about films that celebrate the African American diaspora and the world diaspora. And we also want to highlight local African American filmmakers. So we're very happy to have this festival this year. In fact, we actually are featuring a young African American film festival entrant from Sarasota. By having a variety of different genres, a variety of different films, we even have a horror genre this year. I think it shows and tells people that the African American film experience covers a broad range of genres, whether it's documentary, whether it's features, whether it's shorts, whether it's horror. We try to get a little bit of all of that into this festival so that people who come to the festival and access the festival online will have a choice and variety of the different types of films and genres. Well, I think there's a common denominator for the public, and that is most people love film. Most people have a favorite movie, a favorite actor, and so we think that we can actually communicate the message of diversity and inclusion through film. And so it might be an unconscious type of message that we're giving when somebody sees a film about the African American experience or the African diaspora experience. So while you're being entertained and educated, you're also learning about other people, other cultures that you would not normally be exposed to. So we really want to expose the public and the world to the different experiences of the African American here in the United States and the African American experience here from a historical perspective, from a narrative perspective, from an entertainment perspective, so that they will understand through cinema that we're pretty much all the same. I hope they take away a broad experience of not only cinema, but the African American experience here in the United States. I think coming out of COVID, and we're slowly coming out of COVID, it's been a big challenge. We hope that by having this festival in this setting, in terms of an outdoor setting and live setting for some of the films, and yet recognizing the still danger of COVID by having people who aren't comfortable be able to access it online, we're striking that balance. So coming into this festival, we were certainly aware and conscious of the fact that many people still don't feel comfortable coming out, but those that do, those that are vaccinated and those who have taken the precautions and have been tested, they will have the opportunity to experience a film live, which I think is the way film and cinema was intended.
Well, let me first start by saying that it wasn't just us. Uh, Judge Williams was always part of this collaboration, and we knew we had to work with someone like of the caliber of the people from the film festival if we were going to make this a success. We also knew that we wanted to work with organizations like ASALA, the Association of the Study of African American History, if at all we're going to bring a whole wide group into this. And why do we do it? This is what we're about. We are about better understanding of all the communities. And I honestly feel that these type of interactions and these type of festivals are so important to get people of all types, of all colors, of all genders, to understand each other. It's interesting because we live, as we all know, in a political climate that questions where critical race theory is a topic. But at the same time, we're seeing more and more interest in from all groups of to want to know their neighbors, whether they're their immediate neighbors or people they read about, and it's just a general understanding. And so, despite what politicians say, that is one of the great reasons that it's growing. I think what is great is the words of the festival, visions of the Black experience. So, for example, in this festival, we have a whole story about Black makers of beer. And that goes all the way to the festival talks about some of the darker periods for African Americans, for the whole country. So we have a wide range, and that encompasses not just that, but many other aspects and many films, the whole Black experience. We have a horror movie, we have comedies, and I can't think of a better film festival. And we have approached and we have seen and we've watched a number of film festivals, and I think this is up there with them. And our objective is in the next few years to become one of the premier African American Black film festivals in this part of the country.
Well, I received several emails, one from Judge Williams, and I thought it important to be able to participate and support the week-long events that they're having. Well, you have to have a sense of inclusion, only because we are written out of history most times. And in order for us to be recognized or thought of, or people to consider us and our culture, we need to be able to have these types of events so that we can focus on us. I wanted to see the film that's here tonight, which is, I think, a wonderful one. I saw the excerpts of it, and I want to see more of that.
So I work at the Community Foundation of Sarasota County, and we get to work on behalf of and with donors who want to make a difference in the community. And tonight's Visions of the Black Experience Film Festival is a huge part of telling stories about peoples whose lives matter. And that is a big part. That's why we're here, to tell the stories, because everyone has a story to tell. So this is the second year that the Community Foundation is supporting Visions of the Black Experience. We found out about this through New College of Florida, as well as the Boxer Diversity Initiative. And they really put together a great collaboration to bring together many different voices through many different organizations and groups in the community, and really bring something new to the area to share important stories. The diversity of the types of stories that are being told through Visions of the Black Experience are important because they reach people at very different places. Some things are humorous and maybe fictional. Others really resonate with someone's history that they can remember, or a personal story. And so all the different ways of telling stories allow people to access that experience a little bit differently. Whatever films people see at Visions of the Black Experience, it's really important that they have a chance to connect with what someone else has lived. We all have different experiences in life, and by knowing each other individually, person by person, is how we can make a difference and connect with one another. One of the silver linings of the past year and a half is we've all learned how to get involved with things in person as well as online. So I think if people will take the chance to watch some films either from home or get with them in person, it'll have so many different ways to find out about people you didn't know and people you wish you knew. So just make sure you take advantage of everything that's possible.
So I have the privilege of being a part of the planning team for the Visions of the Black Experience film series. This is our third year, and it's always exciting that we have a chance to bring this great perspective on Black culture and Black contributions to the culture and to the community. So it's always important that we serve as a convener for the community, to bring the community together, to share, not just perspective, not just entertainment, not just knowledge, but all of that, and to combine it together in a way that really, underscores what higher education is about, but really what is being a part of a connected community where we appreciate the contributions of everyone in the community. So one of the things that we've not seen consistently is appreciation of the rich variety of contributions that Black Americans have made to this country and to the world, frankly. We know about, music, we know about, comedy and athletics, but we've made great contributions in the sciences. We have a rich history that's really overcome some amazing challenges and to really contribute to not just entertainment, but to the culture in a deeper way, to our passion around civil rights, around the needs of the community, the needs of the individual, and to really provide an umbrella for impact and inclusion for all people. And I think that it's important that we recognize that history. It's a national history, but it's also very local here in the Sarasota area. We have done some really important things to move the conversation forward. We've had some amazing local leaders that have been powerful advocates for inclusion, for civil rights, and it's important that we don't forget that history. So when we first did this in 2019, it was a traditional in-person film festival serving the local community, highlighting both national and local artists. In 2020, we had to go to a virtual format. And that was a challenge. It was a challenge for all of us. COVID was a challenge for everyone. But we actually took that challenge and used it as a lever to actually broaden our reach. And we found that we could get engagement nationally and even internationally, which was actually an unexpected bonus of pivoting to address the requirements of providing cultural outlets during a pandemic. So this year, we're trying to take the best of both worlds. It's great to bring people together to celebrate this great music that we've got going on here now. But it's also fantastic to shine a spotlight on what Sarasota has to offer to the world and to see what the Black community in Sarasota has contributed, as well as to bring the world into Sarasota and show to this local community the contributions of their neighbors, but also of Blacks in America and around the world. Well, I think everybody is coming to this for different reasons. I think some people are coming primarily to see some good entertainment. There's some people here primarily for the history. There's some people here primarily for the culture. But I think no matter what drew you here, hopefully you get that need satisfied, but you also take away something that maybe you didn't expect. Maybe it's a reflection around how local history amplified what was happening on a national scene, even though you were coming for entertainment. Maybe you were coming for the knowledge, for the history, and you found some humor, you found some beauty, some art that you didn't anticipate. So we're hoping that no matter what drew you to this festival, that you take away what you came for, plus a little something extra. A lot of times we don't think about the contributions of Black people in America beyond a few brief moments in time, the civil rights era, Martin Luther King. We know about our excellence in athletics. We see these sparks. We've had a Black president, but there's everyday people that are making an impact. There are people who have made tremendous sacrifices, not just for national spotlight, but to serve the people in their community. And I think all of these contributions are important to illuminate. And frankly, I think when we come together to recognize those voices that we've not traditionally acknowledged, it enriches all of us.
Hi, folks. We are Paul and Petra Ratner from the Sarasota Film Festival. We're directors of a festival. We've been involved with Visions of a Black Experience for the past 3 years. We are the co-founders of the festival, among some other great organizations like the Boxer Diversity Initiative and New College and Asala and MHI. And we got involved because at some point Dan Boxer and Judge Williams, came to us with the idea of putting together an African American film festival. In fact, they wanted to revive one that was here in the 90s called Project Black Cinema. And we thought it's a great idea because the Sarasota Film Festival always has a great commitment to diversity programming like this. We've been doing this for many years. We always have an African American film panel during the film festival. We also put on other events like a Native American Film Festival, and we just really value the ability to highlight groups in a way that we wouldn't be able to do in a bigger festival. This way, in Visions of Black Experience, we can really focus on films, very well curated films, geared at the African American experience. We scour films from all over the world. We have this year about 220 some submissions, not just from the US, but from countries all over. We actually had submissions from South Africa, from Germany, from Brazil. It's been a great, and we're showing some of those films. So we feel like the festival has really grown in these few years. This year we're showing about 40 films. The majority of the program is online, but we have about 8, I believe, live events. Part of it is, of course, due to COVID. We haven't been able to, do everything that we normally can. But we're very gratified to see the people come out tonight. So we think people are ready to get back to movie theaters, at least to some extent. But the rest of our program is available online. You can actually check it out at any point from now until the 21st. Visionsofablackexperience.com is the website. You go there and you can check out, almost 40 films for free. Some of the highlights of the live program include, of course, tonight's film, which is 100 Years from Mississippi, which is an excellent documentary that's making the rounds of the film festival circuit right now about the amazing life of a lady who is well over 100 years old. Imagine the kinds of things that she has seen in her years. Other films that we're showing tomorrow, actually, on Saturday, the 13th at 7 p.m., we have Monopoly Money, which is a crime thriller directed by a local filmmaker, Will Morissette, who is actually a Ringling College student right now. He's studying for a film degree. And he made this feature film locally using a lot of local talent. And we're excited to be able to screen it to a wider audience. Other highlights include Invisible History, which is screening next Friday at 7 p.m. This is a film that's directed by a Florida professor, actually, Valerie Schoon, who will be in attendance for the screening. It's a film about the invisible history of North Florida that people don't know much about, including traces of slavery and lynching past that people have might not have heard of. It's an important film, followed by discussion, and we hope you come and check that out. But besides all the serious films that we have at the festival, we also have a program that's very diverse. We have a number like 5 films about music from focusing on jazz funerals in New Orleans to the birth of house music in Chicago. So it's a very interesting program about that. So we encourage you to check that out. We also have comedies and romance films like Maya and Her Lover. We're also focusing on a couple of films from the late Melvin Van Peebles, where we're showing Watermelon Man. Also, we have a film directed by John Sayles, another classic film called My Brother from Another Planet, which is going to be available actually next weekend online. So it's another classic sci-fi film. We always try to create, show a very rounded program that's not just one type of film. And so we're excited for people to check it out. So you want to say something?
No, yeah,
Okay.
I gotta go.
All right. So what we'd love for people to take away from the festival is just the amazing variety of experiences that you can see in a film festival like this that you might not know about. We hope that, and also, of course, our film festival is for everyone, for in the community, for African Americans, but also for the larger Sarasota community. So we hope that people will be gratified to see the diversity that's on display, both in filmmaking talent, but also in experience.
Well, it was important for a number of reasons, but I think first and foremost because of the character and the integrity of the people that were getting involved in this endeavor. Years and years ago, we were involved for a while with Project Black Cinema in Sarasota. And while there was some similarity of involvement, this was a new group of people with new concerns and a very current and important topic, especially for Sarasota. I can tell you that in the last couple of years, I've gotten more inquiry from around the world and throughout the United States, of course, about this particular festival. Wanting information, wanting to understand. Many other festivals are trying to model themselves over what these guys have brought together here. So we're very, very proud of our involvement. We're very, very proud of Paul and Petra's involvement in administering here. We love that the Community Foundation has got involved. Of course, Charles Williams, who is one of on our board of advisors that we absolutely adore. His involvement keeps us involved, frankly, because of his commitment to this group. So we're here. We love being here, and thanks for your coverage, as usual. Well, I know I can speak for myself and the board of directors of the film festival. It's what matters to us the most. I mean, we're kind of a cheerleader for the Sarasota Manatee community, and we love doing that. We're a cheerleader for the individual filmmakers that come forward with these fantastic films. I happen to like documentaries the most. And part of that is internally necessarily educational. But this particular effort, and indeed all our educational programs, is just integral to maintaining our own interest in doing this for the community. And I got to say that the Sarasota and Manatee community are so integrally involved in the education of our community, not just children, but adults as well, that, you know, it's just a natural. It flows so easily, and the community demands it. So we try to deliver.
How else?
I found out in the Herald Tribune.
Oh, yeah.
My involvement in this is a consequence of an action that happened when I was 9 years old. My father's from Detroit. My grandfather worked at the Dodge plant. We were living in Massachusetts. We drove to Detroit, went to the Dodge plant. I don't recall how we got there, but after we left, we took a bus. I'm an only child. I ran to the back of the bus, away from my parents. I sat between two elderly people. And after we got off the bus, my father said to me, what were you doing back there? Did you have a good time? And I said, yeah, I guess I had a good time. He said, did you notice anything different about those people? And I said, no. And he said, they were Negro. And that was a sad metamorphic moment for me, because it was the first time that I recognized skin color any more than I recognized eye color. And I'm sorry that it ever happened. I wish that I had never become aware of the distinction, because in my heart, I feel there is no distinction. The great preponderance of us do not know what it feels like to be discriminated against. I just turned 80, yes, and wherever I go, I'm the oldest person there. I finally, after 80 years, can empathize through experience what it feels to be a minority. I'm the oldest person there, and it doesn't feel very good being a minority, feeling that you might be discriminated against because of it. And no, everybody's got to know what it feels like. You got to feel it to understand it, really.
We go to the West Coast Black Theater, and we often wonder why there's so few Black people that go there, because it's all Black performance. But you're asking about these films. I guess a greater understanding of racism and what these people have gone through.
I'd like people to take away from this a feeling that it is necessary to resolve the divisions that we have in this country by simply being kind to other people. Just being kind, being empathetic, putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. We have to think about it.
I want to know more about the history of the Black culture. I'm interested in anthropology, architecture, history, anybody's history. But in particular, since Blacks are a predominant race here in the United States, I want to know more about who they are and what their plight has been. So I think we'll be taking away a lot of that once we start seeing some of these films. I think it's through the arts that a lot of cultural things are transmitted, and it's important that there be a voice in the arts. So that's why it's particularly a good thing to be going on and growing, as you said. I didn't know that it had begun 3 years ago. Wow.
I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad you asked, and I hope that we will evolve into a kinder society. It doesn't take much to be nice to people. I speak Italian, and I
go out of my way to say people when we're in Italy, sei molto gentile, which means you're very kind. And you would not believe how these people just envelop themselves in warmth. When I expel those words, whether I am saying it with sincerity or whether I am just trying to make people feel better.
We're here at the Visions of the Black Experience Film Festival here at Sainer Hall, here on the campus of New College of Florida. This is the closing weekend of our film festival, and we are pleased to have with us Professor Valerie Schoon of Florida State University's film program. Her film, Invisible History, Middle Florida's Hidden Roots, is going to be playing tonight here in a live setting here at Sainer Hall. So I'm going to ask Professor, can you tell us a little bit about the film? Obviously, this deals with a period of time in Florida that a lot of people are not familiar about, and that is the history of slavery and plantations in the Tallahassee-Leon County area.
Yes, well, that is actually the overview of what this documentary is about. It looks at the history of the plantations and the enslaved in Leon County and the surrounding areas, and it also traces the some of the economic and psychological legacies throughout the next century. So through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, civil rights to the present.
And could you tell us, it's an interesting story, is how you became interested in this subject?
Well, I'm not from Tallahassee. I moved there to teach at Florida State and get married and raise a family. And so we had moved to a neighborhood a few years ago, and I realized that, you know, just a few blocks away from our house was a plantation cemetery. So a cemetery for the enslaved. And you can easily miss it if you're not walking because it's flush with the street. But we walked over and we looked at it, and I thought, you know what, we should research it. And here we are, an African-American family living on an old plantation. I should find out about it. And I said to my son, we'll do this as a summer project. And so we started researching it, or I did, and I was really surprised to realize that all of Tallahassee and Leon County was nothing but plantations in the 1830s, and I was unaware. As well as the surrounding counties. And I thought, well, how could I be so unaware of this? And I thought, oh, it's because there's not many markers. There's not many things that say that that was here before. And so I decided to sort of basically go on a journey of discovery for myself, an education process for myself. But as I'm a filmmaker, it occurred to me to make it as a documentary as well, to try to understand more of where I was living and what the history was. So.
And you have a line of history from the first African-American slaves coming into the state of Florida all the way to the present. It's sort of a continuum. And there's a relationship between early slavery, the Jim Crow era, Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement. You sort of draw a line, which I think is very interesting. But let's talk about the geography a little bit, because the term Middle Florida is kind of confusing to those of us who live in Florida who think of Middle Florida as being sort of Orlando. What did Middle Florida mean back then?
Well, Middle Florida back then, when between Pensacola and St. Augustine, so the sort of the middle of Florida is what people were referring to back then. And then, of course, that was the Cotton Belt of Florida, where most of that was being grown, was in Middle Florida.
And in terms of a cash crop, today we think of Florida as a citrus state, and in terms of the cash crop being citrus, but cotton was really king in Florida, and that's something that I was not really aware of in terms of how important it was to the economy. So could you talk a little bit about that crop and how it was critical to the economy of Florida and the country at the time?
Yes, I mean, cotton. I guess with the Eli Whitney, the cotton gin, cotton, boomed again in the United States. And I think as far as Leon County or where Tallahassee, where we were living, it wasn't always the cotton belt. It was really through the 4-second migration of enslaved people to Florida after they, during the Seminole Wars and after the Seminole Wars, when the plantation owners from Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina moved into Florida, that and then grew cotton. That's when it became sort of that cotton became so big here, and so obviously that was a huge part of the financial wealth of white plantation owners.
Now, going past the Civil War, after the Emancipation Proclamation and slaves were technically freed, your film talks a little bit about how actually the yoke of slavery and the persecution of former slaves continued to occur. What did your research tell you about how that was still an issue in terms of really the life of former slaves right after emancipation?
Well, one, I'm glad that you mentioned the word research because it does take a fair amount of research to make a documentary. And one of the things I always like to say is I did have some great professors in this documentary, and I became not an expert on the topic, but just knowledgeable enough from reading their books to be able to ask them good questions. So from these historians who are in the documentary, I did learn a lot. And I learned some about the Reconstruction. Well, immediately after slavery in Leon County area, people were just freed, in the sense that they freed with nothing. So if you had nothing, you left with nothing. So you had rags, you dressed with nothing, you had no money, you had no education, as obviously literacy was against the law. So for many people, it was, very difficult, extremely difficult. During that time period. And I think that, and then for some, during the Reconstruction, there was also simultaneously with that, where there was some advancements in the sense that those who had learned to read when they were enslaved, in the documentary, you'll see a man named Father Page, and he was somebody who was marched down to Florida, had to walk here from Virginia when the plantation owner wanted to move here. And so when he was marched down here as an enslaved person, but following the end of the Civil War, he could read and write. He could read and write because his slave owner had wanted him to be able to read and write to help him in his store. So he was able to sort of start a church, or he'd actually started it during slavery, but he continued it, and they could turn those churches into schools and start to educate people. There were many people who became were voting and got voted into office. So there was promise at the time as well. It just didn't last. Partly because of Jim Crow and coming into law.
Now, we're going to play the film tonight, and for the people who have seen the film or who will see the film, what is it that you want them to gain or realize as they leave the theater after seeing this film? What is it that you'd like for them to take with them?
Well, I think that one, I guess part of the thing is when I would propose making a documentary about slavery, the history of the enslaved, sometimes people might think, but that's so long ago, or why do we have to discuss it? And so for me, I thought, well, I think it's important because they lived and died here. So I think that that's important to one. I think part of my impetus was to sort of pay homage to the people who seem to have been forgotten. That's why I call it invisible history. And so that's part of what I want people to take away. And then I think the other part is to, maybe look at their own communities and the history of what happened there, because this is Tallahassee's local history, or Leon County, although I think it's applicable to the rest of the country as well. But to sort of look and see how the laws and the facts of history might continue to resonate with us today, and that if we have knowledge of what happened before, we can sort of, apply it now. And I sometimes think it's like everybody understands that when it comes to relationships. Like if you're in a relationship, you know that what happened today isn't all that you would talk about if you had a fight. It's long. It starts back when you first met. You know what I mean? And whatever those trends were in your relationship get played out. So I think the idea of understanding your own self by understanding from whence you come or came is part of what I was hoping to do.
And I think you've accomplished it. So, Professor Schoon, thank you so much for making this film. We look forward to seeing it.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Good evening, folks. My name is Paul Ratner. I am the managing director of the Sarasota Film Festival, and I welcome you to the third annual Visions of a Black Experience. Thank you. Thank you for joining us. And here to give some opening remarks is the president and co-founder of the Sarasota Film Festival, Mark Famiglio.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mark Familio, and this is one of our favorite nights, actually. This festival is blossoming and before our very eyes, and we're very, very proud to be associated with it. Tonight, we're very fortunate. There are a few people I haven't seen in a very long time who are here, and I can't even believe there's some very important people here. One of them is the director of the film we're going to see this evening, who's fabulous and a wonderful person from Florida State University, and I can't wait to talk more about the film. I want to thank all the organizations that have been supportive of this fest. ASALA, the Community Foundation of Sarasota, the Boxer Diversity Initiative, I like to call that BDI, New College of Florida, which is a special place in my heart because I went here many years ago. And this didn't exist at the time, and they didn't have any microphones. But I think the auditorium was about that big, and we spoke loudly, and it was all block, and the acoustics were awful. And it's over there still, I think, Hamilton Center. We want to thank the Multicultural Health Institute, and I want to thank Paul and Petra for all the wonderful things they do. And I'm sure I forgot a bunch of people, but I could never forget Charles Williams. He's amazing, the support he has for film, both the Sarasota Film Festival and this festival. We're just so proud of it. I mentioned when the festival started that this Project Black Cinema poster back here brought me to tears because I remember seeing it probably 25 years ago when they were first starting, and we were supporting it back then for a little while. And it's just so great to see that, and that the roots of this festival, I hope, can be found in that festival because there was a lot of integrity wrapped up in that thing. And I'd like to introduce the president of New College, Dr. Oker, who's going to say a few words.
Thank you all. On behalf of everybody at New College, I want to welcome you here. This is my first experience of Visions of Black experience, and I'm excited to be here. I want to make one real quick comment about New College in the context of this amazing film festival, which is that there are many, many things that are special about New College, but one is we really believe in giving students hard things to do. They read hard books, they wrestle with hard philosophical questions, they address issues like how to improve the water quality in the bay, hard things. They do hard things. We believe in working that muscle over and over again. But one of the ways that we know they can be successful is that when they go out into the community to wrestle with these problems, there are these amazing communities and amazing people and amazing organizations to bolster and nurture them. And when I look at this festival, I see the evidence of the creativity, the art, the commitment to art, intellectual pursuit, engaging with ideas, and community. And so thank you for helping us nurture these students and supporting New College students, and thank you for being here tonight. Thanks so much.
The past is very much a part of the present.
We're talking about generational poverty here.
The wealth disparities that we have and our tolerance for inequality, our tolerance for violence is intimately connected to slavery and what comes after slavery.
I want to read a little bit of her biography, and what I'd like to do is ask her a few preliminary questions, and then you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions about her, about the film, and about the work that she does. Valerie Schoon's a graduate of Harvard University. She's been a member of Florida State University's College of Motion Picture Arts faculty since 2003. Professor Schoon teaches screenwriting, producing, and documentary filmmaking. Her students have received numerous awards, including Oscar nominations and entry into many film festivals. Her most recent documentary, which we've just seen, Invisible History, Florida's Hidden Roots, is being shown nationwide, and it debuted on PBS. She has served as a creative executive for Oprah Winfrey's Harpo Films, as a story analyst for the Creative Artists Agency, and as a studio executive for Warner Brothers. Professor Schoon has made a significant contribution to the body of American film culture. Credits include the Golden Globe-nominated The Great Debaters, starring Denzel Washington, Their Eyes Were Watching God, and The Wedding, both starring Halle Berry, the adaptation of Beloved by Toni Morrison, and I found out earlier today, Malcolm X. So please welcome Professor Valerie Schoon. And just so that you know, it's been a long day for Professor Schoon. She addressed students at Booker High School earlier today. She spoke to students from the Social Studies and Histories program and from their cinema movie filmmaking program. She also, later that day and earlier today, spoke to students here at New College. And this is her third Q&A with me, so hopefully she's not bored listening to these questions. But I do want to ask Professor Schoon, because I think it's a very interesting story, how she got involved with this film and how this project was really sparked by a personal experience.
All right. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for watching the film. So for Invisible History, as I was explaining, I'm not from, as you can hear from my bio, I'm not from Florida or Tallahassee. I moved here I left LA, moved here to teach, got married, started a family. And so, didn't truly understand, much of the history. But when we moved into a neighborhood, it's called Benton Hills in Tallahassee, we lived about 3 or 4 blocks down from an enslaved graveyard, which you only can sort of see if you walk by it, because it's like on a street that it's really flush with the street. So if you drive, you can't see it. But if you walk or jog, you'll see it, So I happened to be doing that. So I said, well, here we are living on an old plantation. I said to my husband and son, I thought we should research it. Here we are, an African-American family. And so I thought it'd be a summer thing. My son, I thought we'd look at it. And so I started researching it and was surprised to discover how many plantations made up Tallahassee and Leon County and the surrounding counties. And I thought, wow, I knew that there was 2 or 3, but I didn't realize there was hundreds. And I thought, why don't I know this? I mean, I'm a history and lit major, I like history. Why don't I know this, And I thought, well, it's partly because there are no markers. There's nothing that indicates that this was there. Other than this enslaved graveyard, the street names of the plantation owners, or the streets are named after the plantation owners and buildings and things like that. But I didn't even know that was their connection either, really, until I started looking at the documentary. But there aren't really any markers for the enslaved, and so part of my inspiration for making this was an educational journey for myself. And since I work at I teach film, it made sense to me to sort of make a film about it. And I also wanted to sort of acknowledge and sort of pay homage to the 9,000 or so enslaved people who lived and died in Leon County, as well as the surrounding counties. So that was my inspiration.
And we'll talk a little bit about the technical aspect of this film. Let me start though with the music that we heard. Can you talk a little bit about how the music was used and who made the music in the film?
Yes, I know earlier this evening we had some wonderful music outside, and the music in this, I think is really, I was really fortunate to have, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Gregory Porter Band, the jazz band. Yeah, the Grammy Award winning, yeah. Excellent band. If you don't know them, you should get to know them. Anyway, the bass player in that band was, grounded because of COVID, and so he didn't. So my sister-in-law is friends with him, and she mentioned this to him, and he's like, "Well, I'm not really doing anything." So and he came on board, of which I'm totally grateful. I mean, music is a really important part of any film. one of these things that maybe people don't totally pay attention to, but it's really a blend of a lot of artists, when you're coming together with a film. And I think this film is really a blend of the music. So his name is Jamal Nichols, and so he did that. But I think it moves you through very difficult subject matter. So when you hear the switch to the music, you think, okay, we're moving past that, painful part to a different part. So it allows you to sort of keeps you moving through it. So I think that's really important. But in general, a movie or documentary is a compilation of a lot of artists' work. You can see that there's animation in there. The editing, the people I interviewed all sort of, blend.
Can you talk to us just a little bit about the process? And an additional question, from concept to final edit, how long did it take you to make this film?
It took, I think we started filming in the fall of 2019. So we had good timing in the sense of it being mostly filmed before, COVID and the shutdown. We did film a little bit during COVID, but you could see those were outside. Those interviews were outside. We got a grant from the state of Florida in 2018, but it takes a year, to get the money. So it was a fairly compact amount of time, actually.
And the film, and we had this discussion with some of the high school students. We went to it a little bit more in depth with some of the new college students. But looking at this film, not only do you tell us the history, but you also intertwine the economic impact of slavery and the economic impact of cotton being a driver of slavery. So could you just talk a little bit about that process in terms of this film, of showing how that really, although slavery is considered and should be an evil institution, it was an economic driver for the state of Florida?
Yes, I think that was an important thing for us to sort of focus on. I mean, probably one of my thoughts, or our thoughts about this, was in the face of somebody saying to me, but why another show about slavery, or must we see another one about slavery, because it's, obviously very depressing. And I thought, well, yes, because, some of the legacies, are still with us, and so in the efforts of trying to, bring along my doubters, not that I maybe proved anything to them, but in my head, I thought, well, let me see if I can show them what I see already, and by, going to the economics professor and the other people who can sort of made their life work to sort of study this, to sort of trace, economic wealth and economic disparity, and where does it come from? Because my concern would be that people would just think, oh, they're just lazy, or something. And I'm trying to sort of combat that notion to understand how we've come to this place of there being such economic disparity in our country and where that's from. So that the idea would be that as we go forward in Leon County and the city commission meetings or what have you, that the allocation of funds would come through that understanding, as opposed to, having a short-sightedness.
And one of the things I think the film, and I'll be interested to hear the audience's comment, is the lasting impact of slavery. And in fact, the way that you tie in the early disenfranchisement of slaves post-Reconstruction up until some of the things that are happening today. And I'm assuming that was intentional.
Yes, I mean, I think that, voting is a big part of what we consider, to be an important part of our democracy, right? And clearly in the last couple of years, Amendment 4, I should say my sister has been very active in the League of Women Voters, and therefore I'm active in the League of Women Voters, which I think is a great organization, but of course I would join with my sister, and actually she's just recently become the president of the League. And so one of the things that she's been worked hard on, and I would volunteer for with her, would be Amendment 4. And so, she would speak in her own talks about this law, has been on since slavery. And it's sort of paralleled with my documentary. And so I think that, when you see 1866, yes, there it is, there it's written, and it's actually continuing, and we're still battling that. So I think it was just, partly, yes, it's intentional, but it's also topical because it's actually what Florida was voting on at the time.
Okay. And what I like to do now, this is an intimate enough auditorium that if you speak up, and we'll try to address any questions or comments that you may have with the film. And I saw the first hand. Hang on one second.
Thank you. I guess kind of a natural question. You living in Tallahassee, you see any parallels to what you are talking about in the film, voter suppression, and trying to keep folks from understanding our power with what's happening today in Tallahassee in terms of voter suppression and legislation that prohibits people from encouraging them from voting, as well as definitely prohibiting critical race theory from being talked about in this state. So, you see any parallels there?
Yeah, I mean, I think any voter suppression is going to parallel to what was happening in the documentary. Of course, it's just a different forms of it, But yes, it still seems obviously something that we're fighting about right now to make voting accessible for people all the rules that they've just come out in our state is clearly a battle that we're continuing to wage. Different rules, but same battle. Yeah.
Okay, and in the back, Paul, I think we had a hand raised.
I was able to see so many people that I recognize in the film. My boss is Dr. Larry E. Rivers.
Okay.
Yep, Fort Valley State, now distinguished professor at FAMU. I want to find out more about the funding. You said that the funding came from the state of Florida?
Yeah, you can. They have artist grants that you can apply for. So like a singular artist, like myself. I mean, they're relatively small grants, like $25,000, which is relatively small for a film. Yeah, so that's what I applied for. And then the rest of the funding, because I teach at a film school, I have access to some of the film equipment. Some of my colleagues just sort of came on board. I'm sure they all gave me a cut rate. So it might be hard for somebody else to duplicate what I did because people were working for me for below the wages that they would normally make because they just sort of believed in the project. And then Florida State also, different departments also offered some funding.
Can I ask one other part B to that? Can stories be pitched to the film school for student assistance?
People can sometimes, see if they can attach or attract students to film something, to work with them. And yes, they can. I think it's just dependent on the student's time, and availability, and yeah, that happens.
Okay, and we do have a mic over here.
Wonderful documentary.
Thanks.
I was particularly interested in the medical care, and you brought that up with the interview of an OBGYN. I'm an OBGYN.
Okay.
Who was able to articulate the need for medical care and the absence of that care if he had not been there, which actually kept him there. Could you comment further, particularly? There was no mention made of the hospital, a little mention made of the hospital, but could you comment on that, please?
Well, you were talking about Dr. Brickler, and Dr. Brickler practiced up until just a couple years ago. So he was like he's in his 90s. So he really knows the history, of Florida. And, he did talk more about the hospital at FAMU and the history of how they ended up, for that hospital, treated black people and then treated poor white people would go there. And it was, a very flourishing hospital. As he mentioned, these were like an oasis, for black people. But eventually, they closed FAMU, and they had to integrate with TMH, which was its own Tallahassee Memorial Hospital, which was its own challenge. And of course, then he faced, racism in terms of his, work there. So that's one of the things that, that's part of the interviews that I have for him that didn't make it into this documentary because it was, interesting and really valuable, but not something that could include the full story that he had there.
As an aside, you also have done a documentary about women in medicine. If you could just talk briefly about that.
Yep, I did. I had another documentary come out in July of 2020, so last year, I guess. Anyway, and that documentary is called Daring Women Doctors, Physicians in the 19th Century. And I didn't know, something else I didn't know, that women were becoming doctors, or that there were medical schools in the 1850s. The first medical school for women was Women's Medical College of Pennsylvania. And I was astonished. I thought, wow, women were becoming doctors when they couldn't vote, they couldn't own property. This is amazing. How'd they come up with this idea? And it seemed like, through my research, it seemed like it was sort of a combination of, Quaker ideals and abolitionists, wanting to, advance the cause of against slavery, and women's rights, which came out of abolition, right? Because women realized whatever women who were, fighting against slavery realized whatever petitions they came up with, the officials could just, politicians could throw them in the trash because they had no voting power. And so they realized, how can we advocate for somebody else when we have no power? So, out of that comes, this convergence. And then these women, these intrepid women, would decide to become doctors and, fought against, society, resisted women leaving their sphere of home and domestic concerns. But women doctors would basically say, but how could this not be our concern, especially OBGYN? How could caring for women, giving birth, and women's bodies not be, the province of women if we're talking about decorum? And so that's why, women entered into the business often with OBGYN and then widened from that point. So.
Some other hands raised, yes. Ironically, Dr. Belcito. No.
Oh, Linda.
Yep. No, I'm sorry.
No, me. Okay. All right. First, I have a comment to make. Basically, is that I want to thank you for making this film. There were several places within the film that really resonated with me. You talked about lynching, and my grandfather was lynched. Yeah. And the story about the craftsmen who made the buildings in Tallahassee. My grandfather was one of those craftsmen, not here in Tallahassee, but that's the story that we got, that he built a beautiful home that some white man wanted. And he was lynched. He was put in jail and lynched because of that. That's one of the stories that we hear about that. The second thing you talked about that resonated with me was the part about the graves, the graveyard. There's no sign. We have no idea where he's buried, in some, unmarked grave somewhere, maybe. Yeah, so I want to just thank you for that. I appreciate that. That meant a lot to me.
Oh, well, thank you.
And Paul down front.
I'm from North Carolina, and I just wanted to thank you for a part of the film that I think is very important, something that is rarely, in fact, this is the first time I've seen it in a film pointed out, where you pointed out the migration of slaves from North Carolina down into Florida. And one of the reasons that's so important is because, for the most part, the way that slavery is cast is that cotton was the great monetary driver of slavery. And while it became the great monetary driver of slavery, originally it was tobacco. Mm-hmm. And by you pointing out that these slaves were brought down and they raised tobacco and cotton, I think is extremely important. And one of the things that the 1619 Project didn't get correct was the original driver of slavery economically was tobacco. And as a North Carolina guy, I've known that for a long time. And I'm from a tobacco town. Mm-hmm. And there's a large contingent of black farmers around Quincy.
Yes, I was going to say.
And
Still tobacco.
yeah, and if you could maybe expound about that a little bit, if that's something that you'd like to talk about.
Well, you may know more details about that than I do, but I do know that Quincy was certainly a tobacco, one of the counties, Gadsden County is what he's talking about, was also, was very much tobacco. I don't know a lot of history specifically about that, although I would say that the historians who are in my documentary have written books, and you mentioned Dr. Rivers, and I think he covers that pretty well. If you know, his name is Dr. Larry Rivers, so I don't have a lot of details on that one, to be honest, but I do think that the sort of forced migration isn't something that I had really thought about before working on this documentary either. I mean, you'd hear these phrases like sold down south, you know what I mean? That was always like the worst thing, and now that suddenly made sense to me, like, oh, now I understand, you know what I mean, what that means. Like, all of the South wasn't the same, the lower South was different, and then the numbers, I didn't realize the millions of people who were forced to move south. One historian at the Smithsonian told me, or told all of us, and that prior to this forced migration, there weren't that many black people living in the lower South, so that just goes to show you how different it became because of that, and how many families were disrupted.
And I think the most amazing thing about that story is that they walked. It was a forced walk. It wasn't on a wagon train. It was a forced walk, and that was, you hear the Trail of Tears, but that's, more for the indigenous population. But that was indeed a Trail of Tears. You had a question, Paul, if you could get towards the middle there. Hang on, wait for the mic.
Curious about your time with the Booker students and how they received the film. What were their concerns and main questions?
Well, I think the students' questions, let's see, they had a range of questions. Do you remember what some of them were?
A lot of them were technical. A lot of them wanted to know about how to get into the film business, obviously. An amazing number didn't know who Denzel Washington was, which was kind of disappointing. But they also had questions about the technique and some of the techniques in the film. You may want to talk about that.
Yeah, I think one of the questions was about the different mediums that are in the film, so that you have animation, you have a reenactment, we have the interviews, and on why I made those choices, and part of the reason is. Really, it's because you don't have visuals for some of those things. I have no visuals for the forced march, right? So if I just said it, would it be as effective? And then if I could show something, you know what I mean? And so that's where the animation came from. An alum of the film school, I wanted to come on board, and so the things we selected were the things that we couldn't find visuals for. So the felling of the longleaf pine, the things like that. You sort of were looking for visuals to help people, see it on some level. And the reenactment was just something we decided to try, and it worked out. But we didn't follow the rule of threes. Usually in a film you want to do something at least 3 times. You don't want to do it once, but we sort of broke that rule and did it once. But, so.
A few more questions before we end.
I think
if you can get wait for the mic because we're recording it.
Well, you referred to earlier your sister's involvement. 1.4 million people, mostly black ex-felons, were supposed to be enfranchised. The public voted 65% for it. And how many of them are now enfranchised of those 1.4 million people? I think not too many, mostly not, by the state legislature, just like in 1866, passing a law, suddenly putting this whole fines. That's that. Second thing is, your film is called Invisible History, and your last little thing is visible history. But the whole critical race theory thing, media management, mind management, is about making sure that history remains invisible. Thank you. And stays that way, because when it becomes visible, then this kind of socioeconomic dimensions, and what they're sort of trying to do in Washington a little bit to rectify the situation, that is what the folks who profited don't want to have happen. Big time. They didn't want it in 1877, so they ended Reconstruction. They don't want it today, even a little tiny bit more. It's amazing. So how are we going to be successful yet on PBS in actually making this history and what the implications visible or relevant or politically actionable yet now?
I mean, now with the sort of atmosphere that we're in now.
Yeah, and you saw what they did with critical race theory specifically. They made that a big bugbear, so we may not ever talk about this stuff ever.
Yeah,
do something about it.
It's somebody asked about that earlier today, and I think obviously, well, for myself, I think yes, it's I think in general, I've talked to the faculty members at school, and I'd say that it has sort of a chilling effect. You know what I mean? This notion. I mean, people I don't think have stopped teaching, but it gives them a sort of a chill. You know what I mean? And so, for me, I think first of all, I know that the critical race theory has a lot to do with sort of a legal studies and isn't really applicable to everything, even though I know that people use it in that way. But for my own purpose, I think this isn't theory, this is history, and so I try to document it, in that way, with, things, real legislation and real facts, and in the same way that we interpret a lot of things. We have history about World War II, and this battle happened here, and then some historian's going to interpret it. I mean, so I feel like in that sense, I'm following along with what we've always done, which is talk about history. And the legacy of history, you know what I mean, of whatever happened, you know what I mean? So we do that all the time, with other things, so if we can look at World War II and D-Day, you know what I mean, and see these other aspects, and we can look at this, you know what I mean? I think it's just painful because it's on our ground, on our soil, but we do look at other countries and other trends and interpret history in that manner. So I think that's what I sort of say to my, that's where I'm coming from. And so I think that the idea is for me, is not to sort of say, to really think that I'm engaged in critical race theory, because I don't even know exactly what that is, as I'm not teaching in a law school, but I am, am able to sort of make a documentary about things that happened in the past and to have historians, interpret them as they do.
Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm going to ask two final questions. One question actually may be relevant to this area, and that is you got some inspiration from this film to maybe come back with another project about the runaway slaves and what happened with them. Could you share that with the audience?
Oh, yes. He's mentioning what I'm just starting to work on my new project, and I mean like new. I'm just writing the grants now, which are no fun. But at any rate, but basically what he was saying is this documentary is about all the people who lived and died, working on plantations or, wherever they were working, the cotton fields, tobacco fields. But I became interested in the people who did run away. And I thought, well, what about their lives? And of course, I didn't really realize this until I started working on this documentary either, but, a good number of them, most of them ran deeper into Florida, not to, maybe some ran to Canada or to New York if they could manage it, but man, when you think about it, no easy feat, even just getting out of Georgia, you know what I mean? So, but running into Florida, there were, as you know, maroon communities, there was, relations with the Seminoles, and so that's what I've become interested in exploring, as one of my hopefully a next project for me.
Right, and you were reminded that there's a maroon community, Angola, here in this area, so hopefully that'll be part of the project. So I'd like to leave you on this note, and it's a question I've asked, I think, the last couple of times I've done this. What message would you like to give to this audience? What do you want them to take away from this film, and just your overall impressions of what's occurred here tonight?
Well, when I was making this film, I think as one of my goals was just to say, it happened, it was here, because I really didn't see any information about it. So you can see that a good half of the film is basically this happened, and this is what it was like, just establishing facts. And the second half is what are some of the, legacies, or how did we see the trends happen after that? How do we bring it up to today? So for me, that was my journey. And so I guess I just think, what do I want the audience to get? I guess I want them to sort of see that journey, to see that this actually happened, to think about, where, the impact of Jim Crow and these other things, but not just in my community, but in your own community, and to sort of think of, I think the idea of having the long view, about why things happen, I suppose, is what I was trying to get across, that the long view is valuable, in terms of trying to decide where to go next.
What I'd like to do, in addition to thanking our guests, and it's been such a great time, I want to thank Dr. Oker, New College. I want to thank Paul and Petra, to Sarasota Film Festival. I want to thank Asala. I want to thank Multicultural Health Institute and the Boxer Diversity Initiative. And I have taken upon myself to invite Professor Schoon to enter into the Sarasota Film Festival next year. She has some other projects, and I think it would be great to have you back here, and hopefully that will happen. But I want to thank you again for putting together this great film. Obviously, the audience really enjoyed it, and we hope that you come back soon. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Professor Schoon. And thank you all. Have a good night.